This is Kate Swoboda, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at TeamCLCC.com, and author of the book, The Courage Habit, which is available at booksellers and at Amazon. The Your Courageous Life podcast is all about going after what you want and creating and living a more courageous, emotionally resilient life. Might drop a couple of F-bombs, so maybe don't listen with your kids in the backseat of the car. And here we go with today's episode. Well, hey everybody, it's Kate. Maybe I should say howdy because I'm coming at you from Texas now. And there's a whole story behind that, which I'll share in today's episode. Today's podcast episode is coming after quite an extended break. And it's definitely been an episode that I've mentally started and stopped in terms of its curation and what it would be about several times now. I also feel like I just want to put in a little disclaimer, and I don't want to keep doing this at the top of every single podcast episode, but you know how it is. There are the people. Let me just make this the universal disclaimer that is the case with all things COVID. My kid could walk in at any moment. My husband could walk in at any moment. People can walk in at any moment while I'm recording. I live in a neighborhood where, I don't know, people mow their lawns and have leaf blowers or grass clipping blowers or whatever. You might hear some of those things in the background. The audio quality might not be great. So I'm doing what I can do with my Yeti microphone in my new office in our new house in Texas. Yeah, I have to keep saying this to myself because it's different. Texas is great in a lot of ways, but it's very different than California in some ways and not other ways. It's a whole thing. Anyway, here I am. And here we are. And this episode is about where we are. And I thought of that as the theme of just like taking a breath. You know how when somebody starting a workshop says, let's just take a moment to get into this space. Let's take a breath. That's what I would love for all of us to do right now. Any invitation anybody ever gets you to take a breath, I just don't think it's a bad invitation. That moment of taking a breath slows you down. It attunes you somatically to who you really are, to your very life force. So back to today's episode, which is about where we are, and also about, I'll be sharing the top things, the top tools that I've really been using to get through the past couple of months. Because like I said, if you've been a long-time listener of the podcast, you know that this episode is coming back after an extended break, or one of the longer breaks I've had, at least since I started podcasting. And, this is the thing about coming back after a break, and starting and stopping and thinking, here's what I want to say. I've sat down a gazillion times to just kind of put together some notes for what I want to say, which is usually how I podcast. I kind of come up with, I'll have an idea or a question I want to explore, and I'll map out a loose outline of, okay, these are the things I want to make sure that I really orient this around, and then I'll riff from there. And I've started to do that a few times, and then it just feels like, scattered, less ability to focus than ever. And I'll be talking about why that is and some of the challenges of that in today's episode, and some of the things I've been doing to meet some of those challenges that you might find helpful as well. I also think, too, that this is just the strange part, at least for me, and I know there are a lot of other people listening to this who are like, oh yeah, girl, I gotcha. Having an online presence plus being an introvert. I'm not shy, but I'm very introverted. I love my alone time. And on one hand, I very much want to say to the world all of the things that I've been thinking and feeling and share them, because there are aspects of what I'm navigating with COVID, alongside all of you, of course, that I want to share. And there are times when the drive to share feels almost duty bound, like, ooh, okay. So I've figured out this or that thing that's been really helpful. And I was so relieved when I figured out this or that thing that was helpful. So I want to share it with other people. And I think it's one of the most fun parts of my business all these years, to feel like we're all humans in this together. We're figuring it out together. We're sometimes hurting together. We're often healing together. And I don't have all the answers. Neither does anybody else. But there are all of these little data points that we can pull together to find our way. And in some ways, the drive to talk about what I've been learning or figuring out and then share it feels like that. And it also feels, by the way, very similar to having mothered a newborn. Any of the moms who have gone through the newborn phase, you'll know this. You get through the newborn phase, and then a few years later, a friend has a baby, and you're watching them feel all of the, what the hell did I sign up for stuff that happens, especially in the first 6 weeks. Good gravy. And maybe that friend starts asking you, like, hey, how do I get this baby to go to sleep? And that's when it's like, hey, okay, you'd like to, I'm happy to tell you some things I figured out. Don't know if they'll work for your baby, since all babies are different, but if it does work out for you, I'd love to help. It's kind of a pay it forward that I see among new mothers. And P.S., for those of you who do have newborns, if you're walking through that right now, the best tip I ever got was, instead of rocking a baby in a glider or rocking chair or in your arms, to hold the baby sitting on one of those inflatable yoga balls and just bounce, and that rocks the baby to sleep. My kid was out in 10 minutes with that system. The day, it was like somebody on Facebook told me about this. And I'm like, hun, where's the inflatable yoga ball? And he's just going like, what? Like, why are you asking me? Where's the inflatable yoga ball thing? And he digs it out of the basement and inflates it. And we got our kid to sleep in 10 minutes that night. It just was like, oh my God, it was the best. So may that serve you well. But that's what I think it's like when all of us are going, here's how I'm navigating this crazy, crazy time. So may that serve you well. And if you're in the midst of all this with a newborn, Godspeed, and it will get better. I promise. I remember a day when I was having an ugly cry with my sister on the phone when my daughter, who is now 6 years old, was about 3 weeks old. And my sister says to me, Kate, it's gonna be okay. If it didn't get better when you have a baby, if it didn't get better, nobody would ever have a second child. Think about that for a minute. And for some reason, the logic of that just really got to me in that moment. I'm like, okay, I can go back out there and like tackle life with a newborn again. So that is, I think, the drive to share, to be communal, to be together. But amid all of this drive to share, one of the things I've been honoring is the drive to go within. Now, I'm not talking about a clinically depressed, isolated sort of going within, though, of course, I have felt those urges at times, a weighty sort of like, geez, and I'm sure that all of you have too. Because what we're all navigating together is so difficult and so challenging in so many ways. I mean, more ways than I ever could have anticipated. Sometimes I look back to mid-March before it was like, okay, this is really serious. And one of the last things that I did, actually the last social thing I did, was I met up with a friend and met up with some people for dinner. And it was announced that San Francisco was going to be one of the first cities to put everybody on a mandatory shelter in place. And I remember being at that dinner, it's just like the flu, and thinking that it was just a gross overreaction. Well, I mean, that changed. Boy, did I not know what I was talking about. I can own when I'm wrong. So there's a kind of going within that is really more an incubation that I'm talking about. And I think sometimes the only way we can process an experience is through incubation. It's like the seed that goes underground and it isn't ready to come up until the earth's tilt is just right for the kind of water and sunlight that plant needs in order to fully germinate. And there's something going on down beneath the soil during that time. It's not a deadened process. And yet that time is really necessary. And of course, I'm a coach, and I keep thinking of growth metaphors lately. I keep thinking about things like how some plants have an easier time growing just about anywhere and under any conditions, and other plants have a difficult time growing when the conditions aren't ideal. And so the question is, how attuned are we to what our process is so that we can tend to ourselves, so that we can grow even amid difficult conditions? And I suppose too that I've resisted podcasting because there are other parts that just feel really vulnerable. There are definitely parts of me that are as feisty as ever in a good way, parts that are like, fuck no, this is not going to change me except for the better. That's who I am. That's what I've been training for. I'm going to dig deep. I'm going to take every experience of this that's difficult. I'm going to get tougher and I'm going to get grittier in all the best ways. And there have been parts of me that have even been feeling proud because I can really see how the work I've put into my life to cultivate very consciously certain habits before a pandemic came rolling into town, those habits have served me really well, setting me up to navigate those challenges from a much easier place than I know I would have 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. There are other parts of me, though, to get to the vulnerability, and I am sharing these parts because I don't want anybody to feel alone if this is coming up for them too. There are other parts of me that felt really sad or broken. There have been parts of me that have been looking at what I perceive as a complete lack of leadership in the United States and have felt re-triggered around really old childhood stuff, looking at the world like there are no adults in charge here. No one is stepping up. No one is taking the lead. And just, I feel really alone when I'm in that place. I feel sadder than I can say when I'm in that place. And I feel sadder than I can say when I think about how, for as much progress as we've made in racial equity and inclusion, we still, I'm recording this in July of 2020, and we've got Senator Rand Paul currently blocking the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, which would designate lynching as a hate crime. How, I ask you. And I can't wait till this guy can get voted out. May this be the thing we remember Senator Rand Paul for, that he would not stand up, and what he would stand up for would be to block an anti-lynching bill. For crying out loud, in 2020. It's just, and the sadness I mentioned, but you probably hear in my voice the anger. So there have been parts of me that have been reticent to podcast because I felt angry. And I felt angry actually sometimes at other people because suddenly talking openly about systemic oppression is en vogue. Yet I know that there were multiple times in the past when I tried to talk about systemic oppression and I got backlash for it. I have a whole other blog post I'm working on right now about, air quotes, angry women, and how many times I tried to speak up about things and people would respond with things like, okay, Kate, like, God, you're so angry, you're so worked up. I mean, if you want people to listen to you, you're really going to have to calm down a bit. I'm angry when I think about things like this book that I was invited to collaborate with about, 10, 15 years ago, where I was asked, what are some things you'd like to see change in your industry? And since I'm in the coaching industry, I responded with, I'd like to see more community mental health resources for people of color, for people who can't afford mental health resources. And then the book came out and everything about my contribution was used except for that part, except for me saying that. I noticed that I'm feeling angry because a few years ago when I was working on my book, The Courage Habit, very early in the process, I told one of the editors, I worked with many, many editors over the course of that book, and many of them were phenomenal. And one in particular, I said, I want to bring a more intersectional lens to the examples of courage that are highlighted in this book. And she responded, and I have the email, by telling me that I was, quote, just a white middle-class life coach, And that if I wanted to write a book on feminism some other time, I could do that, but that this book had to, in essence, conform to the book proposal. And then I've been feeling angry with myself. And I've felt angry with myself from a place of, I can point fingers all I want, but what about self-responsibility? I felt angry with myself because I come from an interracial family. I have trans family members. I grew up poor and living in poor neighborhoods where I saw systemic oppression every single day. And yet, for as much as I've talked about systemic oppression for the past several years, usually confining it to my social media feeds, I can think of all the times I backed down, all the times I toned it down, all the times that it just became a knee-jerk reaction to tell myself that to be more acceptable, to be more palatable, I had to play by some kind of rule book. And it's the invisible rule book, right? It's the one that we all kind of know is there, but it's not laid out explicitly anywhere. You know, that book that I contributed to more than 10 years ago didn't use part of my contribution that I think was essential. And I never asked the author why it wasn't used, because I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. I didn't want her to feel criticized. I didn't want to be excommunicated from the group or shut out on any future collaborations or be seen as a troublemaker. I wanted to be liked. And it wasn't like I sat down and I consciously thought that in a logical, linear kind of way, but that's what happened. And later, that editor that I worked with for a very brief time on The Courage Habit had no idea what my family's racial makeup was, or about my trans family members, or about my financial background. She didn't know that I grew up food insecure, or that we had electricity and phone service cut off when we didn't have the money for the bill, or that I had holes in my shoes, or that we drove cars with floorboards so rusted out you could see the road beneath you, or that time when the refrigerator broke down in the winter. We just put our food out on the front porch to keep it cold. True story. You learn a lot growing up poor. And you know what, though? When I say I'm angry at myself, I'm angry because I didn't tell her. I didn't push back and say, wait, hold on a second. This is actually important. I don't just want to offer the more privileged examples of personal growth and change in this book. I want to talk about what it's like when a trans person uses the tools in the Courage Habit to regulate the fear they feel when they're trying to navigate the world just being who they are and never knowing if they could be in physical or other sorts of danger. I want to talk about what it's like when someone coming from a poorer family is trying to figure out how to be the first person in their family to apply for, get into, and then attend college, and how they can practice courage through that process. Because I've met those people. Their stories are real. Their stories deserved to be visible, to be highlighted. And that's on me for not pushing back more, and I take responsibility for that. I'm the one who backed down from saying what felt true for me. And speaking about my background, there are many of you who have been longtime followers of my work who might not have even known until I've just said it in this podcast episode that I come from an interracial family, have openly trans family members, that I grew up as financially insecure as I did. And why is that? Why haven't I spoken into it? Well, that actually I have a little bit more consciousness around, and I'll share it with you. First, I've always felt a strong resistance to sharing that because I chafe at the idea of either tokenizing my family members or being performative. I'm not going to use my family members as if they are characters in the life of Kate, or as if they're evidence of my allyship or overall commitment to creating a better world. That's wrong, I think. And it's for that same reason that I don't typically bring up the 5 different charities that I donate to with every paycheck, or the times that I've offered resources or support for activists behind the scenes, or the times I've phone banked for political candidates, or show you selfies of myself marching and protesting. For me, those actions, and I'm not criticizing somebody else who might take those actions. I'm saying what's authentic for me is that would feel like a centering of myself, as if to say, look at all the good deeds I've done. And I don't want to center myself. I want to center the issues, because that's how we change things. Not with selfies of pink pussy hats marching on Washington, but with donations and protesting and calling your representatives relentlessly and giving support to activists without doing it to get the recognition or the pat on the back. And similarly, of course, it feels incredibly exploitative to think of discussing or invoking my family members' various intersections or identities just because I have a personal brand online. They didn't sign up for that. So for all those reasons, very consciously, I have not discussed my background as much. But I share all of that to paint a picture for the mix of emotion, the sadness and the anger, and sometimes even despair I've felt as I watch how much farther we have to go in order to change our world for the better, in order to not have my family members arrested for the color of their skin or possibly physically assaulted because of their gender identification. It's maddening. It's heartbreaking. It's so many things all wrapped up at once. So I share all of that just to say, if you are feeling these things too, I see you and I feel your heart. And you're not alone in feeling this mix of all the things. And now we get to the part of this podcast episode where I want to circle back and talk about the things that have been helpful for surviving this, because your survival matters. These are the things that I've been doing over the past several months. And to give full context, when I said I'd talk a little bit more about the move, and to give full context, this is the past couple months. So November of 2019, the decision is made that my husband and I, that we are going to leave California. So we spend all of December getting our house ready to put onto the market. January, we put it on the market, and it sells very, very quickly because there is a huge housing shortage in California and in Sonoma County where we were. So that was a whirlwind because it went very, very quickly. And then, of course, in January of each year, that's when we kick off the Courageous Living Coach certification with what in 2020 was an in-person retreat. In 2021, we will be kicking it off with a virtual retreat due to COVID. So we have the retreat, which is a huge undertaking. Our entire team flies from wherever they live to California for this retreat. We do the retreat. House is on the market, offer is in, inspections, all that. If you've ever sold a house, you know how it goes. And we had negotiated into the lease agreement a lease back so that we could stay in the house for 60 days after selling it. So we get all that done. And then COVID hits. Thank goodness we got the house wrapped and sold and all that before COVID hits. The plan was to move to Las Vegas. Now, Las Vegas, whole host of reasons. It's a great city. I think people shit on Las Vegas for reasons that are just completely ridiculous. And I think it's actually a really great city in a lot of ways. So we're going to go to Las Vegas. We pack up all of our pods. We sell everything we can't fit into pods, or finally at the last hour, give it away. We were giving so much stuff away because we just couldn't fit them into pods. We didn't have time to order more. We were going to move to Las Vegas. Then my husband's job gets furloughed due to COVID, which totally jeopardized our financing on the house we were going to move into. So yeah, I've had money fears too. I've had stuff come up around money too. So then we began reconsidering Vegas for a whole host of other reasons. And then 2 weeks before we're pending to move to Vegas, we change our minds entirely about moving to Vegas, and instead we head to Austin, Texas. We do all of this with our 5-year-old, who's an only child, and who literally had no contact with other children during this period, which of course means that emotionally she's going at least a little bit nuts at times. We had one elderly family member who's in her 90s who got coronavirus. Thankfully, she has recovered, but that was a thing when it came up. We then left California, lived in and out of various Airbnbs for a few months while figuring out where we're going to live otherwise. Finally bought a new house, filled out the gazillions of different pieces of paperwork and other shenanigans that go along with that process. As I record this right now, we still do not have a couch or really any living room furniture because we sold or got rid of everything. I mean, we basically rolled into town with like a mattress for my husband and I and a dining room table and our clothing and my books. Have to have my books. And I did all that while keeping a business going, which, by the way, is not just about me. My business financially supports several other people. When you purchase the Courageous Living program or the Courage Habit or any of the other things that I have available, you are supporting several people in this little courageous microeconomy who work as part of our team. And thankfully, my husband's job came back fully from furlough, but there was definitely a period there where it was like, okay, my husband's job is not a guarantee. The entire economy seems perilous. I've got a business to run to support my family. And of course, several other people who work for this business. How are we going to do this? So what I'm about to share is here's how I've done it. These are the top 3 things. I'm just condensing it to 3 that I've really been emphasizing for the past several months. So number 1, and y'all have heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. What I've been finding is the best medicine in the world for these times is to cry it out. Like intentionally, the conscious crying thing. Like, y'all, this is just too hard. You're normal if you are looking at all of this and going, this is hard. It's too freaking hard to try to go through it all without discharging emotion. It's too hard. Processing out your emotions is a tool. And I think often of what we do to cope in our lives as being like having a toolbox. You don't build a house with just one tool, with just a hammer. You have a level and you have a saw and you have all kinds of different tools that you use to build a house. Well, you, in this metaphor, as a human, you're the house. And you need a lot of different tools for yourself to function, to run, to be built. And I don't poo on anybody's tools, okay? Like if one of the tools in your toolbox is antidepressants, okay. If one of the tools in your toolbox is you have been napping a lot and reading a lot of books, okay, cool. I'm just saying, please put into your toolbox discharging, processing out emotion. And I have been so resistant to that for so many years. I was so resistant to that for so many years. I wouldn't say that practice really solidified for me until 2017, but it has been a game changer. So processing out emotion, it's a top tool. When you don't process out your emotion, you start to numb out. And when you start to numb out with substances, with television, with surfing the social media feeds or the news headlines, I actually think that ruminative thinking where you're just running the same worries over and over in your head is a form of numbing out because you just get that tunnel vision about the worries and everything else you become oblivious to everything else. So processing out emotion, what does it look like? You find some privacy. Literally for me, I lay on the floor of my office, or when I was in Airbnbs, whatever private room I could find in an Airbnb these past couple months. My husband, he's aware that I do this kind of work. He does it too. He'd take our daughter out, take a walk with her, and I would just lay there and cry and cry and cry and cry. And sometimes I would hit pillows or scream into pillows, but mostly I'd just cry. I did a lot of crying, by the way, on Interstate 10, I-10, going across that lower half of Texas. It's completely, good gravy. Can I please just never have to drive I-10 again in my life because it's so monotonous. But yeah, I cried a lot on that interstate because it was just like, I don't know what we're doing. This feels really scary. And I don't want to stuff that down. I just want to get it up and out. So processing out your emotions in some ways, the number one tool I can recommend for getting through this, because this is clearly not going away anytime soon. And I will also say that the hardest part of this tool is using it. I got a critic that wants to tell me how stupid I am every single time I sit down to cry. And I always feel like I should talk myself out of my emotions. That's a common theme. Like, oh, come on, like you don't need to cry about it. You need to do something about it. That's what my head likes to say. But I know that in the toolbox that makes us human, crying about it is one tool. Doing something about it is another. And you can't just use one tool. You need many. Crying is medicine. Crying is medicine. Crying is medicine. And if you are interested, I have 2 things, both of which are free. Well, free-ish, I should say. Free-ish in the sense that if you have a Spotify subscription and would like to look for the process work list of music that I use when I process out my emotions, you can find it. It's called Kate Process Work. And then also free, Simple Habit app. I have a number of meditations that are there. I'm a meditation teacher for an app. Crazy. Simple Habit app. All right, second tool I've been using. I feel like I'm going to get flack for this or something, but here it is. Exercise. Second tool, exercise. Again, file under things you probably don't even remotely feel like doing right now. I get it. I really do. Most people struggle with being consistent with exercise, even when there isn't a pandemic. But I'm telling you, there is so much research that correlates exercise and stress reduction, reduction of depression, reduction of anxiety. I'm your resident research nerd around here. When I find a research abstract that points to some really cool conclusion that takes X and Y and puts them together and, we knew something now that we didn't know before. I'm like, it's so exciting. Scholar.google.com. I've had many a date with Google Scholar. We get hot and heavy on the regular. So I got to tell you, I get it. I do. You don't want to, but it's necessary. Exercise. And I don't mean you have to become like a triathlete or a CrossFitter or, any of the stuff that I've done in the past. I like those forms of exercise, but really we're talking about movement, sweat, getting your heart rate up, and got some really good news for you if you don't like to exercise. 20 minutes is enough. And if you don't believe me, there is a book on Amazon, if you want to nerd out as well, called The First 20 Minutes. It is all about exercise science and how actually the greatest benefit of any exercise you do comes from about the first 20 minutes. So if you are a runner and you want to run for 60 minutes and you love that, great. Just know that 90% of the benefit you get comes from the first 20 minutes of running. The remaining 40 minutes is just for your own personal gratification. So if that is good news for you, yay. So 20 minutes, that's all we're talking about. Now, of course, I am not your doctor. This is a podcast. You know your health better than me. You are responsible for your life and what you do following my sharing of this tool. But assuming you can and are healthy and are able to do it, 20 minutes of walking can count. Push-ups, sit-ups, leg lunges count. And it really can be 20 minutes that'll make all the difference. And here's how much I really believe that this makes such a difference in mood and resilience. I believe it so much that I get up at 5 a.m. several mornings a week just to fit in exercise before the Texas heat and humidity set in and before my kiddo is up and running around. I mean, who wants to get up early when it's still dark to exercise? That is not at the top of my list, but it is so helpful. It is that helpful. I feel like I am an evangelist for exercise. And if you knew me 10 years ago, you'd be like, what? But, oh yeah. I mean, seriously, it's big. And if you follow me on Instagram, where I am Kate Courageous, you've seen me post about getting up early to exercise in my stories, which I've started doing to keep myself accountable. I don't like getting up early to exercise, but if I don't, my mood plummets. Like plummets. You would not believe who I am right now talking to you for this podcast is the same person, because who I become when I am not exercising is somebody who's just like, what's the point? I don't even know. I don't even know why I try. Who cares? I mean, it's a pandemic. I mean, I don't know. I just don't feel like it. Like that's how my whole mood becomes if I don't do just a little 20 minutes of exercise a day. So I really believe that this exercise thing, this is one of those times where it's like, you guys, okay, it's hard. You don't want to do it, but you need to, because that's just how it is. It just needs to be done. It's like putting gas in your car, paying your taxes, breathing air. It just needs to be done. Maybe those three things don't go together, but it's what came up when I was riffing. So, all right. First tool, processing out emotion. Second tool, exercise. Third tool, relentless cognitive reframing. Relentless cognitive reframing. I'm no different than anybody else. I have thoughts like, what is the world coming to? Or I can't take this. When is this going to end? Or this has been a big one that's been up lately. If school doesn't start in the fall, my only child is going to be so lonely and this could affect her for the rest of her life. Or fears, what are we going to do about money? Or how is this country ever going to have a necessary reconciliation with its history? Or this is all too much, or all the things. I think the things too. I've had the money fears and lost sleep and worried about my own mental health or the mental health of my husband or daughter or you guys who are listening, the people who are struggling. I have those things too. The fears are normal. I know that I'm courageous not because there's an absence of fear, but because I examine my fear and don't let it stop me from living the life I want to live. Being courageous, you being courageous, is not about being fearless. You're not doing it wrong if you're feeling afraid. Being courageous is about feeling fear, because no one gets out of that part, diving in anyway, which means diving into the fear with intention and asking yourself what the fear is really about, and transforming, which isn't necessarily about goal fulfillment, but is about the ways that we shift and grow and transform because we were willing to be courageous enough to examine our fear. So, for as much as thoughts like, I can't take this, have come up for me in the past few months, my commitment has been relentlessly reframing. I can't take this can become, deep breath, I am managing this moment to moment. Or I can't take this can become, you know what? I refuse to limit myself by defining myself as incapable. I just absolutely freaking refuse to do that. I don't let fear stop me from living the life I want to live. Point blank, end of story. That is it. I would like you to consider in this moment how you can step into that too. Can you say that to yourself right now? I will not let fear stop me from living the life I want to live. Yeah, even in the middle of a pandemic. Point blank, end of story. That is it. And when I say the life you want to live, I'm talking about living the truth of who you are on the inside, expressed on the outside. So I'm not talking about the life you want to live where your favorite restaurant had to close, and that's a bummer, or you are struggling with financial insecurity because your job has been furloughed. I'm not talking about you live the life you want to live in a way where somehow magically you make all the circumstances in the world work out how you want them to work out, because none of us have access to that. I'm talking about when your fear tells you that the world is too messed up for you to live and touch base and tap down into your brightness, your boldness, your courage, your expansiveness, your abundance, your sense of peace. Nope. Personally, when my fear tells me that the world, the circumstances are too messed up for me to stay in touch with my brightness, boldness, my audacity, my courage, my expansiveness, my sense of peace, my abundance, it's like, nope, I do not accept that as my reality. I have been and will continue to do whatever I can to create my world from the place of my most courageous self. Now, my fears will tell me that this pandemic will emotionally mess me up, or my kid, that's a huge hot button, or my husband, or all of you, that so many people are suffering and all of that, and that's just too much and all that. My fears will say that, but what I do is relentlessly reframe it. I refuse to accept that, oh, well, that's just it, nothing to be done. No, I will hone every tool I have to boost my own emotional resilience, to be supportive of my husband, my daughter, my family, friends, all of you in every way possible as long as I'm alive. That's who I am. That's what I'm committed to. That's what I'm doing here. That is a reframe. I note that I did not speak as if I have a magic wand to fix all of the circumstantial things. I don't. What I'm saying is that I live from a place of resilience, and I'm inviting you to do it as well. When you just go, I refuse to accept that this is going to change me in ways that are detrimental to my sense of self, that take me out of alignment with my values, that cut me off from my sense of aliveness or peace or courage. Your fears might be telling you that there's no way you can handle what we're facing right now, but I guarantee you there's some way, and that you will look in the mirror prouder of yourself if you decide, I'm always and forever going to be looking for that way and doing my best to bring about something better. When I say relentless cognitive reframing, I'm actually emphasizing the word relentless. It needs to be relentless. It needs to be when you don't feel like it. It needs to be in the morning, at breakfast, in the afternoon, in the evening, before bed. You hear the voices of fear saying that something can't be done, something can't be possible. You defy that. You defy that in the name of the courageous life you're creating. If these tools feel strange and unfamiliar, and how do I remember to do them and all of that, it's pretty simple. You jot down a note for yourself and you put it somewhere visible. You set a timer on your phone. That's how it gets done. You make the things that are not conscious, conscious. So how will you begin? How will you take your life to an even better level using tools like these? Because even if you're doing pretty well right now, it'd be pretty cool if you were doing even better, if you felt even stronger. I have been challenging myself, and I wouldn't say I've arrived there yet, but I like the game of the challenge. I have been challenging myself to say, what if this was the happiest month of my life? Each month I've been saying that to myself. Start July 1, August 1, September 1, November 1. That's the plan moving forward. What if this was the happiest month of my life? What if I thumbed my nose at a pandemic? Come on, pandemic, I make it the game. What if this is the happiest month of my life? What if I double down on every tool I've got and I emerge from this more resilient, stronger, happier than ever? What if in the middle of this, I'm stronger and happier than ever? I decide, not my circumstances. And that is not to say that I will deny the aspects of this that are hard, and I am not encouraging that for any of you. Quite the opposite. Refer back to tool number 1. The crying is medicine, time to process. It's very real that these are challenging times. But what if they could also be the happiest? What if internally you touched it down into a new wellspring of joy? So those are my top 3. Processing out the emotion, tool number 1. Exercising, tool number 2. Relentlessly reframing, tool number 3. I have days where I struggle more than others, and on those days, I got to be honest with you. It's like, okay, this day sucked. I'm going to go to bed and hopefully tomorrow is better. But most days, I manage to land in a pretty decent place. And sometimes I even feel some relief and some kind of giddy happiness. And my prayer is that whatever hardships we all encounter, may they change us for the better. May this time in our history remind us of what's most important. May we be open about how we can help one another at the same time that we incubate within the process that we are in. I send you my love. All right, that's today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You know you can continue the work and the fun if you want to. Head on over to yourcourageouslife.com/begin and become a Your Courageous Life subscriber, because as soon as you sign up, you get access to an entire library of worksheets and audios and other bonuses. And of course, you'll be receiving more courage in your inbox. And who wouldn't love that? You can learn more about the Courageous Living Coach certification at teamclcc.com. You can get the Courage Habit at your local bookseller, on Amazon, wherever you like. We can even connect on social media. I'm on Facebook at Your Courageous Life. So look for facebook.com/Your Courageous Life. And I'm on Instagram as Kate Courageous. And I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. So here's to you, using these courageous tools in your life and creating a real ripple effect of good. And again, thanks so much for listening. I love it that you're here.